Hello, everyone. Hope you're all keeping safe in these very testing times. I'm Yogini Yog. I'm a research fellow at the health team at the Vidhi Center for Legal Policy. Uh, in this particular legal capsule, we will be discussing challenges faced in the areas of drug regulation during a pandemic. We will be discussing how drugs and vaccines rolled out during a pandemic are made safe and effective by our regulators and our scientists. Currently, we are seeing a rapidly growing number of COVID 19 cases during the Omicron variant. It has been 2 years since we have been living with the pandemic. COVID 19 has thrown new and varying challenges at each and every stage of our pandemic. The area of drug regulation is no different. In this particular segment of this legal capsule, we will be speaking to Dhwani Mehta, the health team lead at Vidhi Center for Legal Policy, and Shreya Srivastav, who is also a research fellow in the health team. Our scientists and regulators have faced the challenge of finding a vaccine that is safe and efficacious within a very short time frame. One of the earliest challenges which we faced during the pandemic has been regarding emergency use approval of new drugs. In the second wave of the pandemic, we faced several challenges, including shortage of life-saving drugs, availability of fake drugs, overprescription, as well as quality defects in legitimate drugs. More recently, some questions regarding the administration of booster doses and administrations of vaccines in children have arisen. In this particular legal capsule, we will be specifically discussing the ethical and legal issues in children's vaccination programs and problems in monitoring the quality of drugs during a public health emergency. For this, I'm going to first reach out to Dhwani. And hi, Dhwani.
Hi, Yogini. Thanks.
Uh, so, uh, Dhwani, I just wanted to ask you about the legal and ethical issues that our scientists and regulators face while ensuring availability of safe and efficacious vaccines for children, especially during a public health emergency. Could you comment on that?
Sure. So, Yogini, the challenges are more or less of the same kind as the ones that you face when approving new drugs and vaccines for adults during a public health emergency. And the challenge there is that you have to work with limited data, which you haven't been able to test in a wide population. And you're balancing that against the need to roll out something quickly so that it can stop the spread of the virus. So obviously there are concerns with a quick rollout of a drug even amongst adult populations, but amongst children, because they are a vulnerable group, these concerns are magnified. Now there are two ways to think about it. One is that when a drug is rolled out for use in children, the question that regulators must ask is there enough data to support the fact that this is going to be safe and effective in children as well? And this is primarily because initially clinical trials are conducted in the adult population. So what must be done to be able to ensure that this kind of safety and efficacy is tested in children as well? Now, the answer to that, of course, is to conduct clinical trials in children. And in fact, this is what the New Drugs and Clinical Trials Rules 2019 recommend, especially when the disease is one that is primarily a pediatric disease. Now, that's not the case with the COVID-19 pandemic. But even when there is a serious or life-threatening disease that is under consideration, the advice is that children should be included as early as possible in clinical trials once the initial safety of the drug has been established sufficiently in adult populations. So, in some sense, your companies drug developers are encouraged to begin clinical trials in children. Now, that's not as easy as it sounds, because conducting clinical trials in children comes with its own set of ethical concerns and challenges. And here, the primary one, of course, is, apart again from that children are vulnerable groups, and they are vulnerable primarily because of their legal status. So until the age of 18, they do not have the legal capacity to consent to their participation in a clinical trial, or in fact, indeed, to the administration of any medical treatment. And informed consent is at the heart of participation in clinical trials. I mean, this is one of the founding ethical principles that governs, clinical research in humans. So what's the way around it? Obviously, I mean, there's been a lot of thought that's been devoted to this, and there are international as well as national guidelines on how to conduct this kind of research, because it's very important that just because they are a vulnerable group, they are not missed out from, they shouldn't, diseases that affect this particular vulnerable group also deserve treatment and therapy, and that treatment and therapy should be tested safely and efficaciously. So currently, the legal status in India is that a parent or a legal guardian or a legally acceptable representative of the child will provide consent to their participation in a clinical trial. But additionally, children are also required, pediatric participants are required to give their assent to participate as well, which is not a legally binding form of consent, but it is their agreement essentially to take part in the trial, which has to then be confirmed by their parent or legal guardian. And this is for all pediatric populations, but I mean, of course, it can't apply to infants. But as far as mature minors and adolescents go, and the assumption there is that they are capable of absorbing the same kind of information and understanding its consequences in the way in which an adult would. So for persons like this, they have to personally sign and date a written consent form as well. And this is a requirement under the 3rd schedule of the new drugs and clinical trials rules. So again, I think the idea behind this is that you assume that even children are able to understand the consequences of this kind of participation and are able to take an informed decision, but that they are not the sole people taking this informed decision, so that there is a check in the form of their parent or their legal guardian who is also consenting to this kind of participation in research. So ensuring that this consent process happens in the appropriate manner is, I think, one of the primary ethical challenges with conducting a clinical trial in the pediatric population. In addition to that, you should have an ethics committee that is able, or an institutional review board that's able to take into account these challenges and ensure that this consent process is happening in the appropriate manner. And there should be someone on the committee who is able to assess the data in a manner that takes into account that pediatric population. So essentially, there should be a pediatrician on an ethics committee when a trial like this is being approved.
All right, Dhwani, thank you for that really detailed answer. I would like to take the next question to Shreya. As Dhwani mentioned, real and effective consent in vaccination especially becomes a big challenge when children are considered because of their age and how we think of their capacity as people who can give consent. Shreya, the question I wanted to ask to you is related to this concept of real and effective consent. In the second wave, we observed that there were multiple drugs that were prescribed to people who were suffering from COVID-19. Not all of not the prescription of all of which was exactly very rational. At that time, we also saw that there was a shortage of drugs and people who may have actually needed those drugs. Recently, some reportage has brought to light some gaps in monitoring of drugs by state drug regulators during the second wave. In this regard, do you think can real and effective consent of people exist in a public health emergency when there is such pressure on the system? Can you shed light on some of the systemic issues of our regulatory system that allows such gap to exist? Shreya?
You have asked a very pertinent question, Yogini, and it is very much related to what Dhwani was talking about. So when it comes to emergency use authorizations or while we do not use this term under Indian law, we are mostly using accelerated approvals or restricted emergency use of drugs. The question that comes that, first, are we compromising on the quality of these
Yeah.
drugs when we are approving these drugs? So as Dhwani mentioned, that of course we have to rely on lesser data as compared to what would have been done in an ordinary situation. So while we do this, it's also important that while we cannot ensure the quality and effectiveness of these drugs at the approving stage, we make sure that the monitoring mechanisms are stricter, and we take them more seriously in these situations. But what has been happening in India, and what we saw during the second wave, is quite contrary to this. So as you mentioned, that we can understand this with an example of a particular drug, remdesivir, and how it was irrationally prescribed during the second wave. While it was authorized for restricted use. We do not define this, like this term hasn't been defined under the Indian law, but as we understand it, the drug controller general, while giving approval for a particular drug for restricted use, may prescribe certain conditions. And for this particular drug, two conditions that were included, just for the understanding of our audience, were that this drug should be prescribed rationally, and to ensure that it is being used rationally. This can only be supplied to hospitals and institutions, and not to the patients or their representatives. And two, informed consent of the patient and or their representatives was must before prescribing or before using this drug on them. But what we saw during the second wave was total chaos. We saw that it was being overprescribed, and patients and like their families or representatives were asked to get this drug, and the whole black marketing, the price of this drug was so high. So all these issues arose because these conditions were not being fulfilled at the implementation level first. And two, the standard protocol that is issued by the National Task Force, or the the standard protocol that has been issued by the National Task Force has not clearly prescribed these conditions or streamlined these conditions in its protocol. And later, the drug was itself dropped from the protocol. So all these things haven't been streamlined properly, which has resulted in confusion and chaos. And what happened with remdesivir in last year is now happening with another drug this year, which is molnupiravir. So it's important that these things are explained properly to the patients. And particularly with these drugs, there are so many side effects, and their effectiveness hasn't been proved properly. Additionally, while we talk about this new drug molnupiravir, the ICMR recently said that it's not included in the standard protocol treatment because it's not effective. Two, there are so many side effects, and patients need to be aware of that before using it. Still, it is being overprescribed by doctors, and like the way it is being circulated in the market, so many pharma companies are running towards getting trademarks for it, and they are misrepresenting its effectiveness, saying that it is going to be magical in treating against COVID-19. So all these things need to be checked and regulated properly.
Thank you, Shreya, for that concise answer. I'd like to go back to Dhwani at this point. I just wanted to refer to the drug regulation is not just about access and availability of drugs, but sometimes an access and availability of drugs can also affect access to other rights such as education, especially when it comes to children's vaccines. Dhwani, this is a tangential question, but I think it is a pertinent question. Uh, Recently, there has been some discussion on making vaccination compulsory for being able to access schools physically. Do you think then you can really say that children can consent to being administered vaccines or no?
Right. No, that's very interesting, Yogini. And I think it's important to remember one, that it's very different to talk about whether a vaccine has been approved for use by the regulator versus how that vaccine should be rolled out in a vaccination program by the
Yes.
government. And I think this point has been highlighted by Dr. Chandrakant Leheria as well in the Hindu. And it doesn't mean that just because we do have a vaccine that is now considered that has been approved for use in children, that we should immediately mandate the rollout of this vaccine to all
Yeah.
age groups in the country. So there has to be a staggered implementation of this kind of vaccination, and I think it's begun in the right direction by making it available for older children
Yeah.
between the age of 15 to 18 first, even though Covaxin has been approved from the age of 2 upwards. So until, of course, until our vaccination program itself makes this available to a wider group of children, there can obviously be no question of mandatory vaccination. And so I think the primary question here is to ask, how should our vaccination program proceed with this kind of rollout? And the answer to that is it should do this cautiously, based on a strict monitoring of adverse events that follow immunization, because it's even more important to look closely at adverse events in children as compared to the adult population, because they can be of very different kinds and in some instances can be more severe. So this requires very close pharmacovigilance monitoring. And the second is to ensure that you make this decision to roll it out based on the current disease burden. So, and depending on how infectious children themselves are, or how they are contributing to the spread of the infection. So essentially, you have to make an evidence-based decision to decide how to roll out the vaccine. Should that decision lead you to the conclusion that vaccination is mandatory for all children, then you can, once that is a considered and evidence-based decision, then you can begin weighing the rights of children not to be vaccinated, or their parents not to have their children vaccinated, against the rights of children to go to school and receive an education. Now, in that regard, that in the US especially, where there's been a lot of debate around mandatory vaccination and a lot of legislation around it as well. So school exclusion clauses for under vaccination laws, should children refuse to or their parents refuse vaccination, it's considered acceptable to deny them access to school. And of course, this is a balancing of the rights of a child to receive education against the protection of public health. So I believe that you can reach the conclusion that mandatory vaccination is required to attend school, but that should be based on a considered view that kind of mandatory vaccination is absolutely essential to control the spread of the disease. You must be absolutely satisfied about the safety of the vaccine amongst children, and you must have done your best to ensure that vaccine is rolled out equitably to all children. So I think we're very far away from being able to mandate something like that.
Certainly. If I were to distill the essence of our conversation, it would be reliance on evidence and following practices of good science and good governance in both the areas that we have discussed. Taking that essence ahead, I just wanted to pose this question to the both of you. What do you think are some of the short-term and long-term policy recommendations you could make regarding rollout of vaccination or drug regulation at this point, considering the COVID-19 pandemic and also in the long term? Shreya, I think you could answer the question first.
Right. So when we talk about the good governance practices, I think one thing that it forms the essence of it is monitoring and setting the accountability. And both these things have been highlighted, the flaws and the gaps in our governance system regarding these two aspects, particularly during this pandemic. So when we talk about monitoring, and the first thing under the drug regulation comes is the adverse event reporting and the follow-up action that should be taken after that. Particularly as I was talking about this drug remdesivir, and how it got emergency approval, and we also recently saw reportage about the adverse events that occurred due to it, and how nothing happened, at the regulatory level, at the state regulatory level basically, and how state regulators did not take appropriate actions at the right time in its follow up. So, and the problems it led to, and the deaths and negligence due to it. So I think it's very important first to make adverse event reporting more stricter, particularly during a public health emergency, as I said earlier, uh, because the quality and effectiveness cannot be ensured at the approval stage in this situation. And two, state regulators should be made more accountable towards taking follow-up actions in such situations. And it should not just depend on the discretion of these state regulators or their convenience. And currently, how fragmented the drug regulation in India is between the center and various states, it is really complex, that when an adverse event happens in a particular state while the drug manufacturing is happening in another state, and where the adverse event is reported, that state regulator cannot take stricter actions and has to basically rely on the state regulator in the manufacturing state. So I mean, this is all complex, and this more accountability needs to be set there, particularly in public health emergencies. And to the standard protocol that is issued by the Ministry of Health should streamline with the conditions that have been prescribed while approving these drugs. It will ensure that that these conditions are taken into account properly, and while medical practitioners also are aware of these while prescribing these drugs. And three, despite these conditions, despite these protocols, if the medical practitioners are over prescribing these drugs, and informed consent of patients is not being ensured, so there should be proper mechanisms for the patients to report that if a certain drug had side effects, and their informed consent wasn't taken in this regard, then they basically they should have a mechanism to report it. And to ensure that this is happening properly, we should also have provisions for mandatory audits of these prescriptions. I think these are some of the things which can ensure proper regulation of overuse and overprescription of drugs in this situation.
Dhwani, the mic is to you.
Sure. So my long-term policy measure is a very simple one, and I'll keep it short. The Prime Minister has announced that he's setting up a committee to redraft the 1940 Drugs and Cosmetics Act. So this is a move in the right direction. We definitely need a new law, but we need a new law that is based on a consultative process, that is modern, that is that equips our regulator with appropriate powers and functions, that provides for liability for harm, and that is above all based on principles of transparency. So this, I think, is the way to go.
Thank you for that really succinct answer, Dhwani. Thank you for your wonderful explanation regarding monitoring mechanisms, Shreya, and what can be the way ahead. Thank you both for participating in this discussion so wonderfully and so actively. I'm sure the viewers will have to have a lot to take with them after watching this discussion. I'd like to also thank the viewers who have listened to us and seen us in this legal capsule so far. Uh, uh, we are all members of the health team, and we hope to see you in possibly a later version of the legal capsule. Thank you.